I pulled my DeLuca electric work van into the parking lot of Holy Name Cathedral and parked between a white Porsche and a black Mercedes that probably cost more than my whole crew earns in a month. The engine ticked as it cooled. I sat there for a moment, looking up at the stone towers through my windshield. And I told myself this was going to be a good day. My granddaughter Sophia was getting baptized. 8 months old. Eyes like her grandmother. I was not going to let anything ruin this. I reached over to the passenger seat and picked up the small velvet box I had carried from home. Inside was a silver cross on a thin chain. It belonged to my wife, Marie. She wore it every single day for 31 years. Right up until the morning she did not wake up. I had kept it in my nightstand drawer for 3 years, waiting for the right moment. Today felt like that moment. A baptism. A new beginning. Marie would have wanted Sophia to have it. I stepped out of the van and straightened my jacket. It was not an expensive jacket. I bought it at a department store on Archer Avenue for $79. But it was clean and pressed, and it was the best I owned. I walked across that parking lot, past cars that cost more than houses I grew up in, and I kept my chin up. 45 years I spent building DeLuca Electric from a single truck and a toolbox into a company with 52 employees and contracts across the south side of Chicago. I had nothing to be ashamed of. The cathedral doors were open. Inside, I could see flowers everywhere. White roses, gardenias, orchids, climbing up iron stands along the aisle. I knew exactly how much those flowers cost because I paid for them. I paid for everything. The venue reservation, the reception hall at the Drake Hotel, the catering, the photographer who flew in from New York, the little white baptismal gown that cost $1,400, which I still cannot understand, but Diane wanted it, so I wrote the check. $29,000 in total. Every candle, every petal, every thread on that gown, all of it came from my account. About 150 guests filled the pews. Women in silk dresses. Men in suits that probably cost what one of my electricians makes in a week. The smell of expensive perfume mixed with incense. I recognized almost nobody. These were not my people. These were Tony and Diane's people. Doctors. Lawyers. Investment consultants. The kind of crowd that talks about wine regions and vacation properties. I made it 4 steps through the door. That is when my son appeared. Anthony Michael DeLuca. Tony. 40 years old. My only child. He stepped right into my path like a bouncer at a nightclub. He was wearing a charcoal suit that fit him like it was painted on. His shoes were polished so bright I could almost see my reflection in them. He looked at me the way you look at something stuck to the bottom of your shoe. His eyes went straight to my hands. I knew what he was seeing. The calluses. The small scars from decades of pulling wire through tight spaces. The grease under my fingernails that never fully scrubs away no matter how hard I try. I had spent 20 minutes at the kitchen sink that morning with a brush, and it was still there. It is always there. It is the mark of a man who works with his hands for a living. Tony leaned in close. Close enough that I could smell his cologne. Something French that Diane probably ordered online. He kept his voice low, so the guests would not hear. But I heard every word. Each one landed like a hammer on bare skin. You don't belong here, Pop. 5 words. That is all it took. 5 words from the boy I taught to ride a bicycle on Low Avenue. The boy I drove to baseball practice every Saturday for 6 years. The boy whose college tuition I paid in full, whose medical school loans I covered when he switched to business, whose first apartment I co-signed because no landlord in Lincoln Park trusted a 22-year-old with no credit history. I stood there in the doorway of that cathedral, holding a velvet box with my dead wife's silver cross inside. And my own son told me I did not belong. Diane was standing 10 feet behind him. I could see her over his shoulder. She was watching. She did not say a word. She did not step forward. She just stood there in her cream-colored dress with her lips pressed together, and she let it happen. I looked past both of them. Somewhere near the altar, in the arms of a woman I did not recognize, was Sophia, my granddaughter, 8 months old. The only reason I was standing in that doorway at all. I could not see her face from where I stood, but I knew she was there. I could feel it the way you feel sunlight through a window, even when your eyes are closed. I wanted to push past him. Part of me wanted to shout. Part of me wanted to grab him by the collar of that charcoal suit and remind him where he came from. But I did not. Because Marie raised me better than that. Because making a scene in a house of God in front of 150 strangers was not something Frank DeLuca does. So I turned around. I walked back through those cathedral doors, across that parking lot full of cars I could never afford and never wanted to afford. And I climbed into my work van. I set the velvet box on the passenger seat where Marie used to sit. I gripped the steering wheel with both hands, and I sat there in the silence for a long time. Then I made a decision. I was done being a checkbook with a pulse. I was done writing checks for people who were ashamed of the hands that signed them. My son wanted me gone. Fine. But he had built his entire life on my name, my credit, and my money. Every single piece of it. And if he did not want me in his world, then I was going to take my world back. I started the engine. I pulled out of that parking lot. And on the 22-minute drive back to Bridgeport, I began making phone calls. The drive from Holy Name Cathedral back to Bridgeport takes 22 minutes if you catch the lights on Halstead. I caught every single one of them red. It gave me time to think, which was either a blessing or a curse depending on how you look at it. My house sits on a quiet block off Low Avenue. 2-story brick bungalow. Built in 1947. My father bought it when he came over from Calabria with $600 and a suitcase held together with electrical tape. I grew up in that house. Marie and I raised Tony in that house. I have replaced the roof twice, rewired every outlet myself, and I still mow the lawn every Saturday morning at 7:15. It is not a mansion. It is not Lincoln Park, but every single brick in that house is paid for. I parked the van in the driveway and sat there with the engine off. Marie's silver cross was still on the passenger seat, inside the velvet box. I picked it up, put it in my jacket pocket, and went inside. The kitchen smelled like the espresso I had made that morning before leaving. The cup was still on the counter, half finished. I poured it out, made a fresh one, and sat down at the table. Then I opened the drawer where I keep my financial records. See, there is something my son does not fully understand about his own life. Tony thinks he built everything himself. He tells his friends he is a self-made man, a businessman, an entrepreneur who opened a cosmetic surgery clinic on Michigan Avenue through hard work and ambition. That is the story he tells at dinner parties while holding a glass of wine that costs more than a case of the beer my crew drinks on Friday afternoons. But here is the truth. The condominium Tony and Diane live in on Lincoln Park West is not in Tony's name. It is in mine. I co-signed the mortgage 4 years ago when they could not qualify on their own because Tony had missed payments on 3 credit cards and a car loan. The monthly payment is $3,800. It comes out of an account that I funded. The BMW Tony drives to the clinic every morning is on a lease. That lease is under my name because his credit score was not high enough to get approved. $950 a month. The office space where Tony runs his clinic on Michigan Avenue is a commercial lease. When he signed it 2 years ago, the landlord required a personal guarantee. Tony could not provide one. So I did. $3,200 a month. Add it all up. The condo, the car, the office. That is roughly $8,000 every single month flowing out of accounts connected to my name, my credit, and my signature. $96,000 a year. To support a son who just told me I do not belong in the same room as his daughter. I pulled out my checkbook. The last check I had written was number 4712. Made out to the Drake Hotel for $16,500. That was the deposit for Sophia's baptism reception, the event I was just thrown out of. The check had not cleared yet. I knew because I checked my accounts every morning at 5:30, a habit I picked up from Marie, who balanced our books at the kitchen table every Sunday after church. I picked up the phone, and called Chase Bank. The branch manager, a woman named Linda, has known me for 15 years. I told her I needed to place a stop payment on check number 4712. She asked if everything was all right. I told her everything was fine. I just needed it stopped. She processed it in 2 minutes. Then I asked her a second question. I asked her to review every automatic payment, every authorized transfer, and every standing instruction connected to my accounts. I wanted a full list by Monday morning. She said she would have it ready by 9 o'clock. I hung up and made a second call. This one went to my accountant, a man named Gino Bianchi. Gino and I have worked together for 23 years. He does the books for DeLuca Electric, and he handles my personal taxes. I told Gino I needed a complete accounting of every dollar I have spent on Tony in the last 5 years. Every payment, every co-signed loan, every guarantee, every gift. I wanted it itemized, and I wanted it by Wednesday. Gino was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Frank, is this about the baptism?" Word travels fast on the south side. I told him it was about accountability. He said he understood, and he would get it done. The third call was the one that mattered most. I called my attorney, a woman named Grace Nakamura. Grace is not a family lawyer. She is a litigator. She handles contracts, fraud, and corporate disputes. She has a reputation for being thorough and relentless, and she charges $450 an hour, which I can afford because I have spent 45 years living below my means. I told Grace everything. The baptism, the $29,000, Tony's words in the cathedral doorway, the condo, the car, the clinic, all in my name or backed by my guarantee. And then I told her what I wanted. I wanted to know my options. Every single one. I wanted to know what I could legally freeze, cancel, or reclaim. I wanted to know what would happen if I pulled every thread that held my son's life together. Grace listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Frank, are you sure about this? Once we start, it gets ugly." I looked across the kitchen at the photograph on the wall above the stove. Marie and me on our wedding day, 1978. She was 23. I was 25. We had nothing. We built everything together, dollar by dollar, wire by wire. And now our son was spending that legacy like it meant nothing, while treating me like an embarrassment. "I am sure," I said. Grace told me she would start pulling documents in the morning. She told me not to make any other calls, not to contact Tony, and not to do anything emotional. She said the next 48 hours would determine everything. I hung up the phone and poured another espresso. The kitchen was quiet. The house was quiet. Outside, the October wind pushed leaves across the driveway. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out the velvet box. I opened it and looked at Marie's cross. The silver had darkened with age, but the chain was still strong. Just like me. I closed the box and set it on the table next to my phone. Then I waited. I did not have to wait long. By 9:15 that evening, my phone had 19 voicemails. The first voicemail came in at 4:17 in the afternoon. Tony's voice was calm, almost pleasant. "Hey Pop, it is Tony. Listen, I just got a call from the Drake. They said the deposit check bounced. I am sure it is just a bank error. Can you call them and sort it out? We have got 150 people at the reception right now. Call me back." The second one came at 4:32. Still calm but tighter. Like a man trying to hold a door shut while something pushes from the other side. "Pop, it is me again. The hotel manager is asking questions. Diane is handling it, but we need that check cleared. Let me know." By the third voicemail at 4:51, the door was starting to crack. "Dad, I do not know what is going on, but this is embarrassing. The caterer is threatening to stop service. There are important people here. Call me back. Right now." I sat at my kitchen table and listened to every single one. I did not skip ahead. I poured another espresso, and I listened the way a doctor listens to a heartbeat, carefully, noting every change in rhythm. Voicemail 4 came at 5:09. Diane's voice this time. She has a way of speaking that sounds polite on the surface, but carries a blade underneath every word. Frank, this is Diane. I do not know what kind of game you are playing, but you need to fix this immediately. We have the Hendersons here. The Walshes, Dr. Pratt, and his wife. These are people who matter. People who matter. 150 people who matter. And one electrician from Bridgeport who does not. Voicemail 5. 5:27. Tony again. The calm was gone. What did you do? I just called Chase, and they told me there is a stop payment on the check. A stop payment, Dad. The hotel wants $16,500 by tonight, or they are shutting down the reception. Sophia is here. What is wrong with you? He put Sophia in it. Tony has always known which buttons to press. He learned it from watching Diane, who learned it from law school, where they teach you to find the weakness and press until it breaks. But I have been an electrician for 45 years. I know what happens when you put too much pressure on a wire. It does not bend. It snaps. Voicemails 6 through 10 came rapid fire between 5:40 and 6:15. Tony and Diane, back and forth, like two people passing a grenade. The tone shifted from anger to bargaining. Tony offered to come over and talk. Diane suggested we could work this out like adults. Tony said he was sorry about the cathedral, that it came out wrong, that he did not mean it. Voicemail 11 arrived at 6:43. Tony's voice dropped to something I had not heard since he was 15 and crashed my truck into a fire hydrant on 31st Street. Dad, I just tried to use the Visa, and it was declined. The bank said all authorized users have been removed from your accounts. What is happening? I cannot pay for the valet. People are staring at me. Good. Now you know what it feels like. I did not say that out loud. Marie would not have approved. She would have told me that revenge is a poison you drink yourself. But Marie was not here. Marie was in a velvet box on my kitchen table, reduced to a silver cross and a memory. Voicemails 12 through 16 came between 7 and 8:30. The bargaining was over. Now came the threats. Diane's voice was sharp and precise, every word chosen like a scalpel. Frank, I am calling our attorney Monday morning. What you are doing is financial abuse. We will file for power of attorney if we have to. You are clearly not in a stable mental state. Financial abuse. Power of attorney. Unstable mental state. I had been a checkbook for years, and now that the checkbook was closed, I was suddenly incompetent. Funny how that works. Voicemail 17. 8:52. Tony. In his car. I am coming over. Do not lock the door. I got up from the table and locked the door. Voicemail 18. 9:03. Diane. Cold. The blade fully unsheathed. I have already contacted Dr. Alan Pratt. He is willing to provide a professional evaluation of your cognitive state. This can go easy, or it can go hard, Frank. A professional evaluation. Because I stopped paying for a party I was not welcome at. I have managed contracts worth millions. I balance my own books. I file my own taxes with Gino every April. But suddenly, because I closed my wallet, I am incompetent. Voicemail 19. 9:14. Tony. Almost a whisper. Pop. I know today was not great. I know I said some things. But you cannot pull the rug out from under us. Everything we have is connected to you. The condo, the car, the office. If you shut it all down, we lose everything. Is that what Mom would have wanted? He used Marie. He put her name in his mouth like a coin in a slot machine, hoping it would pay out. And for one moment, it almost worked. Because Marie would not have wanted this. Marie wanted Sunday dinners. Marie wanted Sophia on her lap. Marie wanted her son to be a good man. But Marie also taught me something else. Love without respect is not love. It is servitude. I saved all 19 voicemails. Then I called Grace Nakamura and told her to expect a visit from Tony's attorney by Monday. I told her about the cognitive evaluation threat. Grace did not sound surprised. They are going to try to declare you incompetent. Standard playbook when money is involved. I am scheduling you for an independent assessment tomorrow morning. Dr. Rebecca Walsh at Northwestern. If she clears you, their case falls apart before it starts. I agreed. We hung up. I washed my espresso cup and placed it back on the shelf where Marie always kept it. Second shelf. Left side. Handle, facing right. Some habits you do not break because breaking them means admitting the person who created them is gone. I went upstairs, set my alarm for 5:15, and lay down on my side of the bed. Marie's side was still empty. It always would be. But tomorrow was Monday. Whatever was coming, I would face it the way I have faced everything since I was 18 years old, one wire at a time. The real enemy was not my son. My son was a weak man, married to a strong woman with expensive ambitions. The real enemy was whatever had convinced Tony that the hands that built his life were something to be ashamed of. And that enemy was about to find out what happens when an electrician cuts the power. Monday morning. 5:15. The alarm went off and I was already awake. I had not slept more than 2 hours. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Tony's voice in that cathedral doorway. You don't belong here, Pop. 5 words on a loop, like a song you cannot get out of your head. I showered, shaved, and put on a clean flannel shirt. I made espresso the way Marie taught me. 2 scoops of lavazza in the mocha pot, medium flame. Pull it off the second it hisses. I drank it standing at the kitchen window, watching the sun come up over the rooftops of Bridgeport. Orange light on brick. The same view for 45 years. At 6:30, I drove to the DeLuca Electric Yard on 35th Street. My foreman, Sal Moretti, was already there. Leaning against his truck with a thermos and a cigarette, he was not supposed to be smoking. Sal is 68. He has worked for me for 31 years. He knows me better than anyone alive now that Marie is gone. He took one look at my face and said, "How bad?" I told him everything. The baptism. The 5 words. The voicemails. The threats. Sal listened without interrupting, which is unusual for a man who has an opinion about everything from politics to pizza dough. When I finished, he crushed his cigarette under his boot and said, "You want me to go talk to him?" When Sal says talk, he does not always mean with words. I told him no. I told him this had to be handled the right way. Marie's way. With patience and precision. Like wiring a panel. You do not rush it or someone gets hurt. At 8:45, I drove to Northwestern Medical Center for the cognitive assessment Grace had arranged. Dr. Rebecca Walsh spent 90 minutes running me through tests. Memory sequences. Pattern recognition. Verbal reasoning. She asked me to count backward from 100 by 7s. She asked me to draw a clock showing 10 minutes past 11. She asked me what year the Korean War ended and who wrote The Old Man and the Sea, 1953. Hemingway. I may be 70, but my mind is a steel trap and the spring is still tight. At the end, Dr. Walsh looked at me across her desk. "Mr. DeLuca, your cognitive function is well above average for your age group. No indication of impairment or diminished capacity of any kind. I will have my full report by Wednesday, and I will testify to these findings if needed." One threat neutralized. But I knew Diane would not stop there. She works like water, always finding the next crack. I got back to the house at 11:15. Tony's BMW was parked in my driveway. He was sitting on the front steps with his head in his hands. Diane was in the passenger seat, talking on her phone. She did not get out. She never gets her hands dirty. Tony stood up when I pulled in. He looked like he had not slept either. His charcoal suit from yesterday was gone, replaced by jeans and a wrinkled polo shirt. For a moment, he looked like the boy who used to sit on these same steps waiting for me to come home so we could throw a baseball in the alley. That moment passed quickly. We need to talk, Pop. I unlocked the door and walked inside. Tony followed. Diane stayed in the car. I sat at the kitchen table. Tony stood. He always stands when he is nervous. Pop, you have to turn everything back on. The bank froze my access. The visa is dead. I could not buy gas this morning. Diane had to use her own card, and she is not happy about it. Sit down, Anthony. He sat. When I use his full name, he sits. That has not changed since he was 12. I am going to tell you some numbers, I said. The condo on Lincoln Park West. My name. $3,800 a month. The BMW. In my driveway right now. My name. $950 a month. The office on Michigan Avenue where you play doctor with people's faces. My guarantee. $3,200 a month. That is $7,950 every month. $95,400 a year. For 4 years. $381,600, Anthony. And yesterday you told me I do not belong in the same room as my own granddaughter. Pop. I said I was sorry. It came out wrong. It came out exactly right. You meant every word. You have been thinking it for years. You just finally said it out loud. Tony leaned forward. What do you want from me? The truth. You make $300,000 a year at that clinic. Diane makes $150 as a consultant. Between you, there is no reason to still be living on my dime. So where is the money going? Something changed in his face. A flicker. Like a light bulb right before it burns out. He looked toward the window. Toward the driveway, where Diane was still on her phone. It is complicated, Pop. Uncomplicated. He stood up and walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the knob and said without turning around, You do not know what you are getting into. Is that a threat? It is a warning. He walked out. The screen door slapped shut behind him. Through the kitchen window, I watched him get into the BMW. Diane put down her phone and looked at him. They sat for a full minute without moving. Then she turned and looked directly at the house. Directly at the window where I was standing. Her expression was flat and still, like the surface of a lake, right before a storm. Then Tony backed out of the driveway and they were gone. I stood there for a long time. Tony had told me I did not know what I was getting into. He was probably right, but I have spent my entire life walking into dark buildings with nothing but a flashlight and a voltage tester. You learn to trust your hands. You learn that the most dangerous thing in any room is the circuit you cannot see. Something was wrong with my son's life. Something bigger than pride and expensive taste. And Diane knew. That look through the window was not anger. It was calculation. I picked up the phone and called Grace Nakamura. We need to meet. Today. Tuesday morning. 5:30. I was at the kitchen table with a cup of espresso and a yellow legal pad. I had written 3 words at the top of the page. Where is it going? Tony makes $300,000 a year. Diane pulls in $150. That is $450,000 combined. Even after taxes, even after living expenses, there should be money left over. But there is not. There is nothing. Every single bill connected to their life is paid by me. Which means $450,000 a year is disappearing somewhere, and my son does not want to tell me where. At 9 o'clock sharp, I walked into the Chase branch on Halstead Street. Linda was waiting for me with a manila folder. She looked uncomfortable, which told me everything I needed to know before she said a word. Frank, I pulled everything you asked for. Every automatic payment, every standing transfer, every authorized instruction on your accounts going back 5 years. She opened the folder and slid a printout across the desk. There are some things here you should see. I put on my reading glasses and looked at the first page. There were the payments I already knew about, the condo mortgage, the BMW lease, the clinic rent, but underneath those, in a section labeled Miscellaneous Recurring Transfers, there were 6 line items I had never authorized and never seen before. $3,000 a month to something called Lakeview Aesthetic Holdings, LLC. $2,000 a month to North Shore Medical Consulting, LLC. $1,500 a month to a company called Prestige Wellness Group. $800 a month to an account labeled D. DeLuca Personal. And 2 more payments. One for $1,200 and one for $900. Going to names I did not recognize. I added them up on the legal pad. $9,400 a month. $112,800 a year. Being siphoned out of my accounts through transfers I never authorized. Linda, I did not set these up. I know, Frank. That is what concerns me. The authorization forms on file have your signature, but when I compared them to your original signature card, there are inconsistencies. Someone may have forged your approval. I sat there for a long time looking at those numbers. My son had not just been living off my money, he had been stealing it. Quietly. Systematically. For what looked like at least 2 years based on the transaction dates. That is roughly $225,000 taken from accounts I trusted him to respect. I asked Linda to freeze every single unauthorized transfer immediately. She did. I asked her to flag the accounts for potential fraud. She did that too. Then I asked her to print everything, every statement, every authorization form, every transfer record, going back 3 years. She said it would take an hour. I told her I would wait. While I sat in the lobby of that bank, my phone rang. It was Grace Nakamura. Frank, we have a problem. Tony and Diane's attorney filed a petition this morning with the Cook County Circuit Court. They are seeking emergency guardianship over your financial affairs. The filing claims you are exhibiting signs of cognitive decline and making irrational financial decisions that endanger your dependents. I closed my eyes. Diane had not waited. She had the paperwork ready before Tony even came to my house yesterday. That look she gave me through the kitchen window was not a reaction. It was a countdown. What does this mean? I asked. It means a judge could temporarily freeze your ability to manage your own assets until a hearing is held. If they get a sympathetic judge and a doctor willing to sign off, they could lock you out of your own money within 72 hours. They have a doctor. Alan Pratt. He was at the baptism. Diane mentioned him in one of the voicemails. I figured. That is why I had you see Dr. Walsh yesterday. Her report will be our counter. A board-certified neuropsychologist at Northwestern outweighs a party guest with a stethoscope. But we need to move fast. Grace told me she was filing an emergency response by end of day. She told me to bring every document from the bank directly to her office on LaSalle Street. She told me not to answer any calls from Tony or Diane or anyone representing them. I hung up and sat in that bank lobby staring at the tile floor. An old man in a plastic chair, holding a phone that felt heavier than a pipe wrench. My son was not just ungrateful. He was not just ashamed of me. He was actively trying to take control of everything I own. The house on Low Avenue. The company. The accounts. 45 years of work. And they were trying to put it all in a box with their names on it. Linda came back with a thick stack of printouts. 3 years of records. I thanked her, put them in a cardboard box she gave me, and carried it to my van. I sat in the driver's seat and opened the top folder. The forged signatures were close to mine, but not perfect. The F, in Frank, leaned too far to the right. The D, in DeLuca, was missing the small hook at the bottom that I have written the same way since I was 16 years old. Whoever forged these was careful but not careful enough. I drove straight to Grace's office. She cleared her afternoon. We spent 4 hours going through every page. Grace laid the documents across her conference table like a surgeon laying out instruments. By the time we finished, the picture was clear. Tony and Diane had created at least 2 shell companies to funnel money from my accounts. Lakeview Aesthetic Holdings and North Shore Medical Consulting were both registered to a P.O. box in Evanston. The registered agent on both was Diane Marie DeLuca. The filings were dated 18 months ago. This was not a desperate act. This was a plan. Grace looked at me across the table. Frank, this is fraud. Wire fraud. Forgery. And potentially elder financial abuse under Illinois law. We can go to the police. Not yet, I said. She raised an eyebrow. I want to know everything first. Every company. Every dollar. Every person involved. I am not going to cut one wire and hope the whole panel goes dark. I want to see the full circuit before I pull the switch. Grace nodded slowly. Then we need an investigator. Someone who can trace the money and find out where those shell companies lead. Do you know someone? I know exactly someone. Detective Ray Kowalski. Retired Chicago PD. Now private. He specializes in financial crimes. He is thorough, he is discreet, and he does not scare easily. Call him. Grace picked up her phone. Outside the window, LaSalle Street was full of people in suits walking fast and looking at their phones. None of them knew that on the 14th floor of this building, a 70-year-old electrician was about to start tracing a circuit that would burn his own family to the ground. I did not want this. I want that on the record. I did not want any of this. I wanted to hold my granddaughter at her baptism and give her a silver cross and go home and drink espresso and remember my wife, but Tony and Diane had taken that away from me. And then they had come for everything else. A man can forgive disrespect. A man can forgive pride. But a man cannot forgive being erased from his own life. Wednesday morning. Grace called at 7:15 while I was pouring my first espresso. She does not waste time with small talk, which is one of the reasons I trust her. Dr. Walsh's report came in. Full clearance. She is calling your cognitive function exceptional for any age, not just 70. I have already filed it with the court as an exhibit attached to our emergency response. Their guardianship petition is going to hit a wall. That was the first good news I had heard since Saturday. But Grace was not finished. I also heard back from Detective Kowalski. He can meet us this afternoon at my office. 2:00. Bring the bank documents. I spent the morning at the DeLuca Electric Yard, trying to do normal work. Sal had the crew running a rewire job at a restaurant in Pilsen. I reviewed invoices, signed purchase orders, and answered calls from a general contractor about a hospital project on the west side. Normal things. The kind of things a man with diminished cognitive capacity supposedly cannot do. At noon, I stopped by Gino Bianchi's office to pick up the financial summary I had asked for. Gino had it ready, in a brown envelope. He had itemized every dollar I spent on Tony over the past 5 years. The total made me sit down, $487,312. Not counting the $29,000 for the baptism. Not counting the forged transfers. Nearly $500,000 given freely to a son who used it to build a life he was too embarrassed to let me be part of. Gino looked at me over his glasses. Frank, I have to tell you something. When I was pulling these numbers, I noticed something odd. About 18 months ago, there were 2 new LLCs added as payees on your business account. Not your personal account, your business account. DeLuca Electric's operating funds. My stomach dropped. Which ones? Lakeview Aesthetic Holdings and something called Prestige Wellness Group. Small amounts. 500 here, 700 there. Labeled as consulting fees. I assumed you had approved them, so I never flagged it. Frank, I am sorry. Consulting fees. Paid from my company to shell companies controlled by my own daughter-in-law. They had not just been draining my personal savings. They had been skimming from DeLuca Electric. From the paychecks of 52 men and women who show up every morning and work with their hands. I told Gino it was not his fault. He had no reason to question payments that appeared authorized. I asked him to pull every transaction connected to those 2 companies and have it ready by Friday. Then I drove to LaSalle Street. Detective Ray Kowalski was already in Grace's conference room when I arrived. He was not what I expected. I had pictured a big man with a badge and a bad attitude. Instead, I found a lean, quiet guy in his mid-40s with short gray hair and calm eyes. He wore a plain navy blazer and no tie. He shook my hand firmly, but not hard. The kind of handshake that says, "I am not trying to prove anything." Grace made introductions and laid out the situation. The unauthorized transfers from my personal accounts. The shell companies registered to Diane. The forged signatures. The guardianship petition. And now the consulting fees from DeLuca Electric's business account. Kowalski listened to everything, took notes in a small black notebook, and did not interrupt once. When Grace finished, he looked at me. "Mr. DeLuca, how much total are we talking about?" I told him the number from the personal accounts. 225,000 over 2 years. Plus whatever Gino found on the business side, which we did not have a final number on yet. Plus the 487,000 I had given voluntarily over 5 years. And the 29,000 for the baptism. Kowalski wrote it all down. The voluntary gifts are not crimes. The forged transfers and the business skimming are. The guardianship petition could also be considered part of a pattern if we can show it was filed to cover up financial exploitation. "Can you trace where the money went?" Grace asked. "Give me the bank records and the LLC filings. I will have a preliminary map within a week. If these companies are real, they will have bank accounts, vendors, tax returns. If they are shells, the money went somewhere else and I will find out where." I handed him the cardboard box of documents from Chase. He picked it up like it weighed nothing and set it beside his chair. Then he asked me a question I was not expecting. "Mr. DeLuca, does your son have a gambling problem?" I blinked. "Not that I know of." "Why?" "Because in my experience, when a couple making $450,000 a year is still broke and stealing from family, it is usually one of 3 things. Gambling, drugs, or a second life. We will find out which one." He stood up, shook my hand again, and left with the box. Grace and I sat in the conference room in silence for a moment. The afternoon sun was coming through the window, throwing long rectangles of light across the table. I thought about what Kowalski had said. Gambling, drugs, a second life. None of those words belonged anywhere near my son's name. But then again, neither did forgery or fraud. And here we were. Grace broke the silence. "There is one more thing. A woman called my office this morning. Her name is Carmen Reyes. She said she is a former patient of your son's clinic. She wants to talk to you." "About what?" She would not say exactly. But she mentioned a surgery that went wrong and a settlement she never received. She sounded scared, Frank. And she specifically asked for you by name. I did not know anyone named Carmen Reyes. I had never heard Tony mention her. But something about it sat heavy in my chest. The way the air feels before a thunderstorm, when you can taste the metal in it. "Set up a meeting," I said. Grace nodded. "Tomorrow, 10 o'clock. My office." I drove home through rush hour traffic on the Kennedy Expressway. The city moved around me like it always does, loud and alive, and indifferent. I thought about Marie. She used to say that every family has a room they keep locked, a room with things inside that nobody wants to look at. You can ignore it for years, she said. But eventually someone opens the door. I was standing in front of that door now. And it was opening whether I wanted it to or not. When I got home, I parked in the driveway and sat in the van for a few minutes. The house was dark. No one was waiting for me. No one had been waiting for me for 3 years. I reached into my jacket pocket and felt the velvet box. Marie's cross was still inside. Still waiting for Sophia. I went inside, made espresso, and sat at the kitchen table with Gino's envelope and my yellow legal pad. I wrote 2 new names at the bottom of the page. Carmen Reyes. And below that, a question mark. The circuit was getting bigger. More wires. More connections. And somewhere in the middle of it, something was pulling current that I could not yet see. Thursday morning. 10 o'clock. Grace's conference room on LaSalle Street. I arrived early, and sat in the same chair from the day before. Grace brought in 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of the empty chair across from me. She is on her way up. Frank, I want you to listen before you react. Whatever she tells you, just listen. I nodded. I have spent 45 years listening to walls before I cut into them. You tap. You listen. You figure out what is behind the surface before you make a single hole. The door opened and Carmen Reyes walked in. She was 28 years old. Small. Dark hair pulled back. She wore a gray sweater that was too big for her, and jeans washed so many times the knees were almost white. But none of that is what I noticed first. What I noticed first was the left side of her face. From the cheekbone to the jaw, the skin was tight and uneven, like melted wax smoothed by an unsteady hand. A ridge of scar tissue along the jawline pulled her mouth slightly to one side. Her left eye drooped just enough that you could tell something had gone wrong beneath the surface. She was a young woman who had once been beautiful and was now carrying someone else's mistake on her face every day. She sat down and did not touch the coffee. Her hands were shaking. Mr. DeLuca, thank you for seeing me. I did not know who else to talk to. Call me Frank. Then she told me everything. 14 months ago, Carmen went to Tony's clinic on Michigan Avenue for a facial contouring surgery. She had saved for 2 years, working double shifts as a nursing assistant on the South Side. $11,000. Paid in full, in cash. The surgery was performed by Tony. Something went wrong. Carmen did not know the medical details exactly, only what the emergency Almost 11 months old. She had started pulling herself up on furniture, holding the edge of the coffee table with both hands and bouncing on her legs, like she was testing whether the world could hold her weight. I sat on the floor next to her and let her grab my fingers. The same fingers with grease that never fully scrubs away. She did not mind. She held on tight. 18 months passed. I know that sounds fast when you say it like that. But living it was something else entirely. Living it was 547 mornings of waking at 5:15, making espresso, and listening to the sounds of a small life breathing through the baby monitor on my nightstand. Living it was learning things I never expected to learn at 71 years old. How to braid hair. How to cut grapes into quarters so they are not a choking hazard. How to sing a lullaby at 2 in the morning when nothing else works and you are so tired your bones ache but you keep singing because the small person in your arms needs you to. Sophia turned 2 in March. She was walking. Running, actually. In that unsteady way toddlers have where every step looks like a controlled fall. She talked constantly, not in full sentences yet but in bursts of words strung together like beads on a wire. No was the first word she learned. That was not mama or dada. She said it 14 times a day. I counted once, on a Tuesday, because I had nothing better to do during my lunch break at the yard. Rosa stayed on. She had become less of a caretaker and more of a grandmother in everything but title. She taught Sophia Spanish words before breakfast. She taught me that a man my age should eat more vegetables and less cannoli, a lecture I tolerated but did not obey. She kept the kitchen stocked with food that was not espresso, which I suppose was her greatest achievement. Sal was there every Sunday. He would show up at 10 in the morning with a box of pastries from the bakery on 26th Street and a newspaper he had already read twice. He would sit on the living room floor and let Sophia climb on him like a jungle gym while I made breakfast. He never mentioned the baseball bat. He never mentioned the night he slept on my couch. He never mentioned any of it. That is how men like Sal show love. They just keep showing up. The company ran itself, mostly. My foreman handled the day-to-day. I went to the yard in the mornings, reviewed bids, signed off on jobs, and came home by 3 to take over from Rosa. I had cut my hours for the first time in 45 years. The crew understood. They sent Sophia a hard hat with her name on it for her first birthday. Size extra small. She wore it around the kitchen for a week. Father Michael came for dinner once a month. He would sit at the kitchen table and eat whatever Rosa had left in the refrigerator and tell stories about the parish that made me almost forget the reason we had grown so close. Almost. He never pushed me to talk about Tony. He never brought up Diane. He just sat and ate and played peekaboo with Sophia and reminded me, without saying it directly, that grace exists even in broken families. Carmen Reyes had her 3rd surgery in January. Dr. Singh said it was the most successful of the 3. The nerve function on the left side of her face had improved to roughly 60%. She would never look at the ding the way she did before. But she could smile, without effort now. And she had gone back to patient care at the clinic on the south side. She called me every few weeks. Short calls. She would tell me about her work, about a patient who made her laugh, about a recipe she tried that went wrong. She never said thank you anymore. She had said it enough. Now she just called, which meant more. Kowalski sent me a Christmas card. Inside he had written, "The circuit is closed. Stay safe, Frank." I pinned it next to Carmen's photograph, on Sal's corkboard. The hard part was Tony. He was released from Stateville Correctional Center on a Tuesday morning in February, 17 months into his 3-year sentence. Good behavior. Participation in a financial literacy program, which struck me as ironic, but I kept that opinion to myself. Grace handled the paperwork. Reese signed off on the early release. His conditions included 2 years of supervised probation, community service, and a prohibition on managing financial accounts for any business or individual other than himself. He did not call me when he got out. I did not call him. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. Then a month. Rosa asked me once if I was going to reach out. I told her I was waiting. She asked what I was waiting for. I did not have a good answer. The answer came on a Thursday evening in late March. I was in the kitchen feeding Sophia her dinner, which was mostly pasta with butter, because she had entered a phase where she would only eat 3 foods, and all of them were beige. The doorbell rang. I opened the door. Tony was standing on the front steps. He was thinner than I remembered. His hair was shorter. He was wearing a plain blue jacket and jeans that did not fit perfectly. No charcoal suit. No polished shoes. No cologne. He looked like a man who had been stripped down to his actual self and was still figuring out what that meant. He was holding a brown paper bag. "Pop," he said. "Can I come in?" I looked at him for a long time. Long enough that the March wind pushed through the doorway and I could feel it on my face. Long enough that Sophia, from her high chair in the kitchen, called out, "No," because I had been gone too long. I stepped aside. Tony walked in. He stopped when he saw Sophia. She looked at him from the high chair with a piece of buttered pasta in each hand. She did not recognize him. She was 9 months old the last time he saw her. She was 2 now. A different person. A whole person with words and opinions, and a hard hat with her name on it. Tony's eyes filled. He did not move toward her. He just stood there in the hallway of the house he grew up in, looking at his daughter, and let the tears fall. He set the brown paper bag on the kitchen table. "I brought cannoli," he said. "From the place on 26th. Sal's place." He remembered. I pulled out a chair. "Sit down, Anthony." He sat. We sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours that night. Sophia fell asleep in her high chair with butter on her chin. I moved her to the crib upstairs and came back down. Tony was still sitting in the same chair, hands folded, waiting. He talked. I listened. He told me about the tax debt that started everything. $40,000 he owed the IRS from a year he underreported income at the clinic. Too proud to ask me. Too afraid of what I would think. So he borrowed from people you do not borrow from. And when he could not pay, Victor Hale showed up at the clinic and made it clear the debt would be collected one way or another. Diane saw Hale not as a threat but as an opportunity. She had been planning the asset transfer for months. Hale gave her leverage over Tony and an enforcer she could direct. Tony went along because he was too deep and too weak to say no. I was a coward, Pop. I let her drive and I sat in the passenger seat with my eyes closed. I asked about the baptism. The 5 words. He closed his eyes and said Diane told him that morning that if he did not keep me away from the guests, she would tell Hale to accelerate the collection. She rehearsed the line with him. "You don't belong here, Pop." She chose those words because she knew they would cut deep enough to make me leave without a scene. And you said them. I said them. And I have heard them every night since. In the motel. In the cell. In my sleep. I did not forgive Tony that night. Forgiveness is not a light switch. It is more like a rewire. You pull out the old connections, inspect the damage, and lay new wire 1 inch at a time. But I told him the door was open. I told him Sophia needed a father, even an imperfect one. He came back the next Sunday. And every Sunday since. He arrived at 10, the same time Sal arrived, and for the first weeks they sat on opposite sides of the living room like 2 dogs deciding whether to fight or share a bone. But over time, slowly, the way ice melts in March, Sal began to soften. Not because Tony apologized, because Tony kept showing up. Tony got a job at a medical supply company in Cicero. Took the bus. Rented a studio in Berwyn smaller than the bathroom in the Lincoln Park condo. He did not complain. He worked. He showed up on Sundays. He learned Sophia's words, her foods, her routines. He learned she liked yellow, feared dogs bigger than her, and only fell asleep to a song Rosa taught her in Spanish. In April, Sal gave Tony a brick, an actual brick from the original foundation of the DeLuca Electric Building. My father laid that foundation in 1961. Every apprentice gets a brick on their first day. It means you are part of something built to last. Tony held the brick and looked at Sal. Sal shrugged. You've got a lot of work to do. Might as well start with a good foundation. Sophia's second birthday party was on a Saturday in late March. We held it in the parking lot of DeLuca Electric. Not at the Drake Hotel. Not at a cathedral. In a parking lot on 35th Street, surrounded by work vans and tool racks, Rosa made a cake with yellow frosting. Sal brought pastries. Father Michael said a blessing that lasted 45 seconds. Eddie Fan came with his family. Gino brought a savings bond. Kowalski sent a stuffed bear with a note that said, "For the toughest kid on Low Avenue." Carmen Reyes came. She stood near the back until Sophia walked over and handed her a plastic cup of juice with the seriousness of a sommelier presenting wine. Carmen laughed. Both sides of her face moved. Not perfectly, but enough. Tony stood off to the side most of the party, watching Sophia, watching me, watching the mismatched family that had formed in the wreckage. Then Sophia ran to him and grabbed his leg and said, "Daddy up," and he picked her up and held her and closed his eyes. 40 people. Not 150. No Porsches. No $1,400 gowns. Just people who had earned their place. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the velvet box. 18 months I had carried it. I walked to Sophia, sitting on Tony's hip, eating yellow frosting. I opened the box and took out Marie's silver cross. "This belonged to your grandmother. She wore it every day. She would have given it to you herself if she could." Sophia grabbed the cross with frosting-covered fingers. She held it to the light and watched it shine. She did not know what it meant. She was 2. But one day she would. One day I would tell her about Marie, about the house on Low Avenue, about a man who built a company with his hands and almost lost everything and built it again. Tony looked at me over Sophia's head. He did not speak. His eyes said what his mouth could not. "Thank you. I am sorry. I will do better." I nodded. For now, that was enough. That evening, after everyone left, I sat in the kitchen with Sophia on my lap. The house smelled like frosting and espresso and pozole. The cameras were still running, but I had not checked them in months. The danger had passed. The circuit was closed. Sophia was asleep against my chest, her hand curled around the silver cross. I could feel her heartbeat through my shirt. Steady, strong, like current running clean through new wire. I looked at the photograph above the stove. Marie, 1978. Smiling at me, from across half a century. "I took care of our boys," I said. "Both of them." The kitchen was quiet. The house was warm. And for the first time in 18 months, the silence did not feel empty. It felt like home.